I grew up attending a Christian church from birth. It was very small and family-like, and we loved it as kids. In 2008, when I was about 9 years old, we found out that someone had taken their own life in our church. It was super strange and unexpected for the congregation. A few months later, we learned that the pastor's wife had passed away. He had beaten her and tried to stage a car accident. When she died, our pastor held a memorial service for her at the church. That Sunday, my family and I showed up to support him and her family. You know how at funerals people stand in line and you usually walk up and hug them? It was the same thing here. We walked up to offer our respects, and I hugged him. He got away with it for over a year before people started questioning the whole situation. During that time, he continued preaching at our church and went on with his life as usual. Fast forward a little, and they realized that my pastor had killed his wife. But then some people began questioning the death of his first wife from 1999. This man had killed 2 wives. He got away with one and almost got away with the second. As for the person who took their own life, we later found out that he did it because the pastor was having an affair with another married member of the church, presumably the man's wife. I was not only close to this man, but I had slept in the same house as him during our Bible retreats. It's super creepy and has given me a lot of trust issues. I am a 19-year-old Muslim girl, and this is my story. I visited my homeland for my brother's wedding in 2013. I was 7 years old at the time. The house my family and I were staying in, which is also our own house, is located near the cemetery area, surrounded by trees, abandoned houses that people haven't lived in for years, and very few lights. One night, I was walking from my house to my uncle's house, which was at the end of the street, about a 5-minute walk. To get there, you have to cross in front of the cemetery, or take another road, which would take a lot longer. As I had been living there for quite some time, I was used to it. This night was also my birthday, and I was on my way to my party. I went alone, as everyone else was already at my uncle's house. As I passed the cemetery, I saw a shadow that looked like a little boy. From what I could see, he looked younger than me, with no shirt, just black shorts. All I saw was his back, and he was just standing there, facing the wall in a corner. I didn't think much of it at the time. I assumed it must have just been a kid playing while their father or grandfather was praying at the mosque in the middle of the cemetery. So I called out to see if it was someone that I knew, but he didn't react. He just stayed there. I watched for a moment, but then my mum called me to come inside quickly to cut the cake. I only looked away for a few seconds, and when I looked back, he was gone. I thought maybe he ran away, so I didn't think much of it and went on with my day. A few days passed. There were still a few days left before leaving the island and returning to the capital city where I live. During this time, I kept having strange dreams about being followed or chased by something or someone. It wasn't clear at first, but it started getting worse. I began seeing the little boy in my dreams. That's when I knew something wasn't normal. I told my mum about it, and she suggested I pray and do zikr to help. It stopped happening for a while, but after we returned to the capital, I grew distant from my prayers and zikr. The dreams started again, and I still didn't continue my prayers. I just let it happen. The dreams didn't stop. I started getting paranoid and even began seeing the boy inside my house when I was alone. He couldn't get close to me, but he was there. I saw him, and I felt his presence. Every time it happened, it felt like he was taking my soul from my body. It felt like the whole house was shaking. Now that I think about it, I realized he had no face at all. After a month of this, the physical reactions got worse, and I decided to tell my parents about it. They brought a man to perform ruqya, on me. That day, while he was reciting the Quran, I felt comfortable and thought I had fallen asleep, but my mum explained to me that while he was reciting, I was laughing, my eyes were shaking, and I was stiff the whole time. When he finished, I woke up as if nothing had happened. Now, I'm safe from it, but I still have ruqya done on me occasionally, just in case. But to this day, all of it still scares me. My parents got married while still in high school. I wouldn't recommend this. The 12th grade to be exact. They were legal adults. I came just a year later when my mum was 19 and my dad was 20. We lived in a one-bedroom upstairs apartment in a crappy complex. I slept in my crib until I started climbing out of it and finding my way into my parents' bed or into trouble. When I was 4, my parents decided that I needed my own room, so they upgraded to a 2-bedroom downstairs apartment in the same complex. They fought horribly all the time, but outside of that, everything was pretty normal. I made a few friends with other children around the complex, and a cousin with her 3 kids also lived in the complex. Everything was fine until a new neighbor moved in next door when I was 6. Immediately, this lady didn't like me, and she didn't hide it. I was at school when she moved in, but on the weekends when I went out to ride my big wheel bike and play, she stood in her door and glared at me with the most hateful look a person could give a child. To be honest, I didn't like her either. Something about her bothered my spirit greatly. Though at the time, I didn't understand why. It was like she could sense my presence outside and would literally spawn outdoors just to stare daggers at me and mutter things under her breath. I felt an evil presence around her and started making a cross with my fingers whenever I saw her. This enraged her, and she lied and told my mum that I gave her the middle finger. My mum believed me instead. Strange things started happening in my room at night. I had a rocking horse. It was beautiful, and I enjoyed playing on it. However, it started rocking on its own whenever I tried to sleep. My parents heard this as the springs made a distinctive noise. I also had one of those dolls whose eyes open and close depending on if it's lying down or sitting up. The doll's eyes would sometimes remain open while lying down, or it would blink, scaring the crap out of me. There were strange knocking noises in my walls. My parents heard this as well, and they allowed me to sleep with them in bed. One day, my mum and I got locked out of our apartment. This was before everyone had cell phones, the 90s, and our cousin wasn't home. Against my pleas, my mum knocked on the neighbour's door to use her phone. She let us in, glaring at me the entire time. I never let go of my mum's hand or came from behind her legs. In her house, on her wall, were multiple upside-down crosses, strange-looking masks, some with horns. There were candles everywhere and small colourful bottles with powder in them. My mum looked around like, what the heck? But kept her composure. She held my hand tighter, made the phone call to my dad at his job to hurry back, and we quickly exited the apartment after thanking the woman. She watched me as we left. My mum told my dad everything, and he told his father, my grandfather, who was a pastor. He immediately brought us a bottle of prayed-over olive oil, holy oil, to anoint our house. My mum also told her side of the family, who were very strict Christians, and they were, for lack of a better word, flabbergasted, and started a prayer meeting. A few days later, we noticed at our back door a white powder substance across the threshold. My mum poured some of the oil on it, and it absorbed it and disappeared. The woman later tried to offer me some candy, which I declined, even though I loved sweets. My nickname was Sugar because I loved junk food so much. I had made friends with a little girl in the complex who lived on the other side. One day, she had some soft chews and offered me one. Like an idiot, I accepted and ate it. It didn't take long before I fell violently ill. Fever, sweating, Skin darkened, dark circles around my eyes. Nothing given to me at the doctor's helped. I couldn't keep anything down. On intuition, my mum asked if I had accepted or eaten anything from anyone, and I confessed to accepting candy from a friend. She asked around and found out that the girl was the granddaughter of our next-door neighbour. My dad called my grandfather, and my mum called her family. They anointed me with holy oil and made a prayer circle around me and started speaking in tongues. I was in and out of consciousness. My grandfather lifted me up and made me drink some of the oil. I remember it burning my throat. Suddenly, I had to throw up. I leaped from the couch where I was lying and sprinted to the bathroom, where I started throwing up thick black sludge. A lot came out. My mum was shaking and on the verge of tears. Everyone continued praying in tongues. I threw up for a while until it was all out. I suddenly felt a lot better. I was fussed at from accepting food from strangers, even friends. The adults talked while I rested. After a few days, the woman saw that I was fine. This time, I glared back at her because I was angry. I was young, but I understood that she had tried to poison me for no reason. I made the cross sign again with my fingers, and she went back into her house and slammed the door. Sometime after that, she moved out. I grew up in Ohio in the 70s, and my childhood friend Joe and I were outside whenever we could manage it. Joe lived on a farm that bordered a pretty big forest, and my parents would drop me off in the morning, and would stay in the woods all weekend, would only come out for school. We loved pretending we were frontiersmen, would build shelters, set traps, practice making fire with sticks, the whole 9 yards. When we got to high school, we got this notion to pull a Stand By Me. This was based on the movie of the same name that had just come out. The idea was that we'd walk the railroad tracks out in the country, but instead of looking for a dead body, we'd find cool bridges to fish from and camp a little ways off the tracks. Of course, we knew this was dangerous, and would likely be trespassing, but we were kids. We had a lot of fun. We did find beautiful rivers. We discovered bridges no one went to. We fished, and we hid from trains. At night, we camped in the woods just near the tracks and made small hidden fires. Nothing bad ever happened. It was idyllic. In fact, it was so fun that we did it multiple times. We never had a problem. After high school, Joe and I went our separate ways. We both left home but always stayed in touch and tried to coordinate visits so we'd see each other occasionally. Well, one summer in the mid-90s, it worked out that we were both in town for about a week. We'd do stuff with family during the day, and at night we'd either catch drinks at a bar or sit outside Joe's house around a fire and talk about the old days. One night, Joe and I got to talking about our Stand By Me trips. Well, nostalgia and beer are a hell of a mix. Soon we decided to take a day, walk the rails, camp one night, and walk home. The day came, and we started out early in the morning. We had my wife drop us off at our usual spot that we used to start, right outside our hometown. She thought this was absolutely crazy and made sure to mention it. When she pulled away, Joe suggested that instead of walking the usual route, we'd go in the opposite direction, just to be adventurous. We knew the land well. We had a map, so I gave her what the hell, and off we went. The day went fine. It was fun and a little sad, but in a good way. We found a bridge, sat on the edge, smoked a joint, and moved on. We had no fishing gear, but we brought some canned food and other stuff. Before night started to set in, we picked a spot to camp. It was a thickly forested area, with the trees on every side of the train tracks, so you felt like you were in a tunnel. We had brought small hammocks to sleep on, but before we set them up, we decided to do a little scouting of the perimeter. Now, this is what we used to do in the old days too. We'd walk around a little bit to make sure some guy's house wasn't just over a hill, and that we weren't actually camping in someone's yard. We walked maybe 100 feet into the woods and up a small incline. We figured if we didn't see anything from the top of this short hill, we'd be fine. But when we got to the top, we saw an old building down at the bottom, about 100 yards into the woods. It was barely visible. We pondered what to do. We both assumed it was a sugar shack or something, because there didn't appear to be a clear road leading to it. From where we were, it didn't look like anyone was inside either. All was quiet, no movement, no lights. We decided to walk a little closer just to make sure. We came down the hill very slowly, and as we neared the building, we saw that it wasn't a sugar shack at all. It was an old church. It had looked like it had been abandoned for years. It was a squat, sagging building whose wooden planks were almost black from years of moss and rot. A cross still stood on the top of the place, also withered black. None of the windows had glass, and there were no doors, just open doorways. We got close enough to see inside. There were rows of pews and a built-up section in the front for a preacher to stand. We didn't go all the way in. We didn't want to. Beyond all that, there was no sign of anyone else. No footprints, no paths, no roads. It was an abandoned church. We left immediately and went back up the hill to the spot we had picked to camp. Having a hill between us and the church made us feel better, but we were still a little uneasy. We chalked it up to the natural creepiness of seeing a church in the middle of the woods. Besides, at this point, it was dusk, and we just decided to rig up our hammocks, go to sleep, and move on early in the morning. Night set in, and as we lay in our hammocks and shot the breeze, we began to hear something in the direction of the church. Our conversation went a little like this. "Do you hear that? What the f*** is that? It sounds like people singing." And it did sound just like singing. We both slid right out of our hammocks and hunkered down, straining to hear more. We listened for a minute or two, and the singing continued, but it wasn't getting louder. Finally, we decided to creep back up the hill and see if we could figure out where the sound was coming from. We could still move very quietly in the woods, just like in the old days. The moon was barely out, but it provided just enough light so you wouldn't walk into a tree. It was near pitch black. We didn't use flashlights as we crept slowly up the hill, and we didn't talk. When we got to the top, we saw light in the distance. It was coming from the church, and the singing was coming from inside. Joe and I put our heads close together and had a hushed conversation that boiled down to, "Can you believe this shit?" The light looked like candlelight from the way it flickered, and though we tried, we couldn't make out what was being sung. It sounded like church music, but in another language. We sat and watched for a while, trying to see who was in there, but we only saw occasional shadows. We had no intention of getting closer either. We were about a football field's length away, and we aimed to keep it that way. The singing continued for a bit, and then it stopped. After that, a booming male voice began to chant. I was already freaked out, but this voice scared the shit out of me. It sounded like some Old Testament preacher that you'd see in movies, but again, it was like he was speaking in a different language, because we couldn't understand a single word. Eventually, the single male voice would say something, and a bunch of voices would answer in song. This lasted for a while, and then they all broke into this long, sustained wail that just kept getting louder. It got so loud and so disturbing that I actually covered my ears. Then it stopped. At this point, I was just getting ready to say, "Let's get the f*** out of here," when Joe put a hand on my shoulder and hissed, "They're coming out!" We were far enough away that we couldn't make them out very well, but what we could see was a line of figures walking out of the open doorway, all holding hands in single file. Some of them had flashlights. They began to sing again, and the light from the flashlights started to move toward us and the hill. We booked it back down to our campsite, grabbed our stuff, and ran to the tracks. Once there, we ran down the tracks in the direction that we had come from. After a few minutes, we stopped and looked back. We saw lights coming down the hill. They were moving erratically, like whoever was holding them was shaking them. We continued to run in spurts and walk as fast as we could. Eventually, we stopped seeing the lights and came to a road. By our map, we knew that a town was about 15 minutes down the road, so we walked there, got to a 24-hour gas station, and called my wife to come get us. My wife and other friends all just thought it was kids messing around, but I heard those voices, and they sure as hell didn't sound like kids to me. Not sure who those people were, but it was definitely the creepiest thing that ever happened to me, out in the woods. Thank you for 1,000 subscribers, Misfits. Welcome to the channel.